I'm excited to be joined by Representative Chris Rabb. He's a Democratic member of the Pennsylvania House of Representatives, representing parts of Philadelphia County. He has served in that office since January 2017, and he is a return guest here on this channel. Representative Rabb, first and foremost, thank you so much for coming back. How are you?
I'm well, thank you. I'm glad to be back on the show.
It's always a pleasure to discuss these issues and topics with you. We've talked extensively about your work there in Philadelphia with regard to reparations, and we'll perhaps, if we have enough time, we'll get to that. But I want to start with something that I know you're passionate about, and that we had a chance to speak about yesterday with regard to the Biden administration and their immigration policies. More specifically, the consistency that we've seen from one administration to the next. And in this case, it's almost as if some of us, not all of us, but some of us who called out Donald Trump correctly for his immigration failures and bigotry are in a way not being morally consistent in this moment. Would you speak to that for me?
Yeah, I'd be happy to. And this is a really important issue right now, as a lot of people are still gloating or in the afterglow of the success of Biden coming into office and the departure of Donald Trump. It's very easy to lose focus, right? The transition to a new administration is an important one, but it's not the end game. The end game is just policies that help everyone in this country, and particularly the most vulnerable. And if the person who you voted for says that they're going to do something during the campaign trail, it is our responsibility to hold them to account, as well as the fourth estate. When we talk about journalism and the media, is to say, okay, are they consistent with what they said on the campaign trail to what they're actually doing now that they're running in administration? And so, when you looked at the pictures and the videos of immigrants in cages, a lot of folks were really salivating and saying, this is a perfect example of how evil Donald Trump is, right? And, conservative Republicans and so forth. But we did not have the same level of scrutiny or concern when Barack Obama was doing more or less the same thing. He was called the deporter in chief because he deported more families over his 8 years than his Republican predecessor over his 8 years. And look, you got to be morally consistent. Either you support immigration, like comprehensive immigration reform and doing what's best for families, irrespective of their country of origin, or you don't. Is it bad when it's someone, a rapist, bigot, xenophobe like Donald Trump? Does it make it any better that the person who was doing it was a Black president who we like, right? We have to raise our game. And I'm specifically talking to civic-minded Black folk, right? That this is so much bigger than party. This is so much bigger than representational politics. I have a friend, Roberto Lovato, who you should have on the show, who's written a memoir called Unforgetting, rather. And he's from El Salvador, grew up in Los Angeles and San Francisco. And he has been talking for years that we have to be really concerned about people of color who are rising to positions of power, who are essentially the new faces of empire, right? Right. If we oppose empire, if we oppose racialized capitalism, which is really redundant, if we oppose imperialism and militarism, the same things that Dr. King got assassinated for, frankly. If we support the radical King and we get upset at white folk and mainstream media for sanitizing Dr. King after the 60s, then how are we allowing ourselves to be complicit in doing the same thing in the 21st century? And that's exactly what's happening.
I gotta hold you there because, man, you just opened up a can of worms. Let's go. You open up Pandora's box. Let's dig into it, because I think one of the first problems is, it's a twofold problem. The civic-minded Black folks that you're speaking of who are afraid or hesitant or squeamish or however you want to describe it, they're not inclined to bring criticism. And it's not just civic-minded Black folks, it's just, Democrats in general, because we came from such a hard 4 years, and then we came through a very difficult election process, and they're not ready. I don't know when, if they will ever be ready, but they're not quite ready to hold Joe Biden accountable, right? And that itself becomes an impediment to those of us. But you said something there. You said if you oppose empire and racialized capitalism, which is redundant, my thing is perhaps maybe they don't really oppose it, not because they don't see the inherent evil in it, but because honestly, the media that they consume never talks about empire, never talks about capitalism, never talks about any of these things, never talks about the consistency in certain policies across every single administration. You're going to see the budget, the defense budget in every single administration increase every single time, bipartisan. You're going to see drones. You're going to see drone strikes in the global South across. We're just waiting for them. If they haven't already occurred, they're occurring soon, right? There's a consistent theme that goes across every single administration, and that is a very thing that comes home to our streets when the defense industry sends those tanks to Ferguson, and they send those tanks into Atlanta, into Fulton County. So speak about it a little bit deeper, because that really is the rub right there.
Absolutely. What are the systems of oppression that have been codified into federal law that have weaponized every administration since their enactment? And when we talk about immigration, we can't talk about immigration without talking about Bill Clinton. Now, a lot of folks joke that he was the first Black president, and I can't stand that stuff. Oh, goodness gracious, right? So, but when there's something that's novel to the electorate, something that breaks up the monotony, they get interested, particularly when there's such a lack of media and political literacy in this country, that when you have someone who kind of doesn't fit the mold, then they get attention. And sometimes that works to advantage. We saw that with Bill Clinton and his affinity to Black folk and Black culture, being from poor boy from Arkansas. Whether it's Donald Trump being, doing everything differently, right? Barack Obama was a novelty in terms of, he was really the first presidential candidate to use social media on a vast scale. I guess you could say Howard Dean did, but he didn't quite make it. So we have these examples of novelties, but the reality is it's overlaying a structure that is deeply problematic. And Bill Clinton pushed forward a bill that was enacted, I believe, in '96 that basically criminalized immigration. And that was the basis for everything that came thereafter, including what happened under George W. Bush, the 8 years under Obama, and Donald Trump. And when we talk now and we see how oppressive these government structures are, most notably ICE, people are saying, well, let's abolish ICE. And Joe Biden can just change the name, but the structures remain the same. It's nothing inherent in ICE that makes it bad, right? ICE is just the term. You get whatever existed prior, right?
Right.
Could have been just as bad, and it was. Perhaps they've tweaked it to make it worse, but fundamentally, that law in the mid-1990s allowed for Democrats and Republicans thereafter to do what's happening now. And because the Biden administration is calling it something else, I forget what the euphemism is. It's more like, detention, family.
They're calling them facilities instead of it's absurd. Yeah,
it's right, but it's marketing. And I understand those of us who don't want to feel like we are part of sabotaging a brand new administration. But some of the most important decisions happen early on, like who our nominees are, right? Who the presidential nominees for these different agencies. And it will set the course for everything else for the next 4 to 8 years. And so this is the time where we have to get out of our comfort zones and stop being complacent and say, why did we want Biden, or why did we want Trump out? However you want to tackle that issue, and say, what do we do now en masse and in a concerted and strategic manner around the issues we care about? And listen, Black folk, we need to understand the importance of immigration, because guess what? There are Black folks who immigrate too. This is not a Mexican exclusive thing. This is not a Central American exclusive thing. And even if it were, this whole centuries long, divide and conquer between Black and brown folk, we walk ourselves right into it when we say they're taking our jobs, right? When in fact, there's little to no evidence that that's the case. Now, you can say that any immigrant group that comes here is taught how to be anti-Black if they don't already have a lot of practice before they got here. That is a fact, right? And Richard Pryor used to joke about it, right? You learn how to be a good citizen by learning how to say nigger, right? He was saying that in the 70s. So while these things are true, the enemy is not undocumented immigrants, and all undocumented immigrants are not Latinx. And we have to understand what we have in common, because if we have any critiques of empire, of capitalism, of structural inequality, then we are pointing our fingers at the wrong groups. We need to be pointing at the corporations who exploit these workers. And because of racist foreign policy for decades,
that's it.
We create the instability in these countries that push these folks towards us because they have nowhere else to go.
And that's the absurdity of it, right? So because the absolute worst place for some of these families to go or come is America. But it's so much worse where they are that they're willing to take those chances and take those risks. And it's bad in their countries of origin, literally because of the United States foreign policy. And so perhaps then, Representative Rabb, the conversation has to continuously pivot back to helping people really understand what they're supporting when they stand and sing the national anthem and they say the Pledge of Allegiance. And when they think that now that they have a blue president, that it's going to automatically be better than when we had a red president. But red or blue, these policies of imperialism and these policies of racial capitalism, but capitalism in general, especially our foreign policy as it pertains to immigration and us creating the conditions that they have to immigrate, that's on us. That's America. That's what America does. That's what Barack Obama did. That's what Donald Trump did. That's what George W. Bush did. It's just that the only difference is degrees of derangement, right? George W. Bush, and this is the thing that drives me crazy, because you have Democrats now who are in love with George W. Bush because he wasn't Trump, but George W. Bush literally destabilized the Middle East for the foreseeable future, for generations to come, right? And so we have degrees of derangement in terms of how they execute it, but it's still being executed. Barack Obama continued those wars, right? He expanded those wars. He continued the drone strikes. They continued and they expanded underneath Donald Trump. And we got a couple of days to see when these reports start coming in exactly how much we continue to expand this imperialism abroad. But people don't like that conversation, because that conversation takes the platform from it knocks their feet from right underneath them, because they no longer have a ground to stand on. And it requires, I think this is what it is once you realize what America really is, it requires you to critique, criticize, and oppose just about everybody in DC and even in your state houses.
You were so on point, and I want to give an example of something that we do just as human beings and as English speakers. There's a term that I used for decades, an expression. It was, we could kill two birds with one stone by doing X, Y, and Z, right? Said it for decades, until I was at a progressive communicators retreat, and somebody was making a similar point and said, you know what, we could feed two birds in one hand. And I said, what? And she looked at me, she's like, we can feed two birds in one hand by doing X, Y, and Z. I'm like, I like that. I mean, I don't need to kill two birds with one stone. Why would I need to do that? Like this. And I'm not a pacifist. I'm not a animal rights person per se, but there's no reason to say something just unnecessarily violent to make a point that has nothing to do with violence. And as an example, another example, I don't say the Pledge of Allegiance because I don't believe it. I think it's a farce. So I don't say it, and I don't let my son say it either. I want them to be critical thinkers. So if they actually believe in what they're saying or what's in the pledge, then they can say it. But don't do it just because everyone else is doing it. We have this pattern of just agreeing or accepting or embracing things that we've never critically pushed back on. And as a result, we need to do the same thing regarding serious policies, whether it's immigration or healthcare reform or worker rights, or issues around reparations. One of the reasons I talk about reparations is I'm trying to talk to people outside of the Black community about reparations and how the history of racial injustice negatively impacts white folk. And that's a conversation that most folks aren't used to having. And it shakes people up. So they just take a step back and say, well, what is reparations? All I know is I'm triggered when I hear a Black person say it because I think they hate me or they're angry or they want to take my money or they say I don't work hard, yada, yada, yada. We can break those things down. We can actually begin to have conversations to move us in a substantive manner in ways that we never do because we say the same terms, we have the same conversations, we have the same assumptions, and we don't push back. And this is not about hating Barack Obama or saying that he's this or that, but it is acknowledging the policy choices he made. He made those decisions and saying he may be smart. He may have a big heart. He may love his family. He may love Black folk, whatever. But the policies he embraced are a legacy in this country that we must shut down, and no one gets a pass.
Well, here's why it's so important, because the policies that he implemented were some of the exact policies that Donald Trump utilized for his power grab, right? What he utilized for everything he did on the international stage. Like, it is the habit of the American government, particularly the president, to amass power unto him or herself and to use that power almost as an imperialist president. And it is enhanced by the fact that we have a cowardly Congress that has no desire to actually hold the president accountable as the Constitution says that it should. And so we have to be able to look at the continuous line from Eisenhower all the way to now in terms of American imperialism on the global stage in a really dominant hegemonic way, right? We have to look at that consistent theme. And that means we have to look at our favorite president's culpability in those things. Here's one thing I want you to highlight a little bit more before we run out of time. This idea of us just taking something that we heard and repeating it because it's convenient and it's useful for that moment. It really brilliant what you said. Instead of us, because I'll try to make that change, right? 2 birds with 1 stone, 2 birds, 1 hand, right? We just hear things and we go with it because it's convenient without critically analyzing it and understanding. We hear and we see, Donald Trump was a threat to democracy, right? Donald Trump was absolutely the person we needed to get rid of. But our critical analysis can't just stop there, because if you ask yourself why you wanted to get rid of Donald Trump, then actually, no, let me turn on the dime. Maybe perhaps some of them only wanted to get rid of Donald Trump because they wanted a Democrat in office and they don't care about anything else. Maybe we got to take that in consideration. For some people who believe that they're civically engaged, what they're really engaged in is just another game of sports.
Right. How many layers of the onion are you prepared to pull off, right? And most folks just want to pull out the outer one because it takes a lot of courage. It takes a lot of work to think about the complexities and the vicissitudes of how our government is run, how the electoral system operates, and how it impacts us, and frankly, our level of privilege, right? Because, it's not just white folk who have privilege, it's anyone who has a quote unquote good job. And my grandfather used to say the worst thing for a smart young Black person is a good job, because they become complacent and they don't critique the structures that actually oppress all of us. Perhaps those with the higher incomes less so, but we have a precarious state as well. And so we have to get out of our comfort zone. Biden being the president is more than incrementally better than his predecessor. I will
Yeah.
say that. It is not
Yeah.
a radical shift. He did not run as a radical. He did not run as a progressive. He is using more progressive language than any presidential candidate, viable presidential candidate in a long time. But he is not doing anything. That's not his role, right? He won because he won the primary
Yeah.
because people thought the white working class folk in purple states would be more accepting of him than a Warren or Bernie Sanders, right?
Back. Yeah. Well, that logic. Well, yeah. No, I'm thinking. Did you say vicissitudes? This is one of my. But
I
I hate
did. Yeah, I
to.
did throw that in there. I wasn't sure if you caught that.
I caught that. That's my TD Jakes word. I got that from TD Jakes years ago.
Is
The
that right?
vicissitudes. I hate to go off on a tangent on such a serious conversation, but the fact remains is that while we are in a better position now, simply because we don't have an all-out fascist dictator in power. I want to, this moment in American history requires critical thinking and nuance, and it requires us to have integrity in what we fight for. And one of the main things I'm hearing you say is that we have to have moral consistency. If it was wrong underneath Donald Trump, it's got to be wrong right now. We only have a few minutes left, right. But just speak about the requirement that we have for moral consistency and then tell the people how they can get up with you.
Sure. I think, listen, it's very easy to lambast politicians. And, I'm an elected official, so I'm used to it with 4 years in office, and it's a well-deserved reputation. But what is our responsibility in terms of co-governance? The things that matter most in between election cycles. How do we make sure that the people who are in elective office uphold their oaths and do what they said they were going to do on the campaign trail? And it should not matter what their political party is or their ethnicity. Right is right. So I don't care who's talking about a particular issue, as long as they're on the right side and that they are doing it in good faith. And because sometimes folks like to say things like, oh, we're going to do community policing and not define what community policing is and not provide any metrics as to how community policing has actually helped or hurt issues around crime or community safety, right? So the rhetoric is not good enough. In fact, it is often used to distract because the underlying policies are a continuation of the legacy of white supremacy and oppression that has existed.
Well, don't tell the people how to get up with you yet, because I need us to, we might go over time, because I wonder if our good aunties and uncles who are so in love with the Democratic Party realize that their inability to criticize, not just critique, but literally hold these clowns' feet to the fire, emboldens white supremacy, emboldens the police state, emboldens the very thing that we are having to march against every day in every city across this country. I wonder if those people who are infuriated by the fact that you just said what you said realize that their inability to hold that cognitive dissonance and resolve it by speaking out against it, that they are themselves complicit with white supremacy.
And that's a hard thing to swallow, but it's no less true. And we can summon that courage because we've done it before. Nobody's more courageous than Black folk, right? To be the conscience of this country, it requires a lot of courage. And but we have compartmentalized our courage. And now it's time to expand it into the electoral and policy realms to say, this hurts Black folk. This hurts marginalized communities. This hurts the promise of America and our participatory democracy. But we have to be more civically literate. We need to understand and connect the dots between what Bill Clinton did, not what he said, not what he did on Arsenio Hall, but what he actually did in office, and show folks, right? Because people are busy, people are tired, people are distracted. It's our responsibility collectively to let people see the genealogy of oppression and how we, by our silence or complacency, make it worse. We have that power, and that's the good news. We have the power. We don't need corporate media to do that. We don't need the Democratic Party to do that. We don't need anyone. We are the leaders we've been waiting for. And there are groups who are already doing that kind of work, but we have to continue.
Yeah. Yeah. Wow. And I'll dovetail it with this. While Bill Clinton was playing and wooing Black America on Arsenio Hall, he was lining up to execute a Black man in order to get elected into the White House. Representative Rabb, tell people how they can find you.
You can find me on Instagram, Twitter, or Facebook at Rep Rabb, R-E-P Rabb, R-A-B-B, like rabble rouser.
Hey, we need a few more rabble rousers around here. Listen, Representative Rabb, thank you so much for joining us. We will always love to have you back anytime you're available.
Thank you so much.